Hello? Is anyone out there? Hello, Quaxo. Hello, Tecalote. I thought we'd try something a little different today. I felt like reading this evening. I thought if I do it on stream... Hello, Melodiva. Welcome in. I was just telling some of our regulars here that we're doing something a little different today on stream. I felt like doing some reading, and I thought maybe I'll actually stay awake at this late hour if I do it on stream with a little music in the background rather than just trying to read in bed and falling asleep immediately. So I have a couple of short story collections and some other things here beside me. I was thinking about reading from this collection of short stories from Ursula K. Le Guin. It's a little hard to see with my filter on there, but it also looks cool because of the fire. This book is called Changing Planes. So I was thinking about reading some out of there. And I have a couple things here from Borges, in case you're familiar with Borges. And maybe some other things, I don't know yet. We'll see where this goes. Let me know how it sounds, like if it sounds okay. My audio setup isn't maybe the greatest for spoken word, but just let me know if anything needs to be adjusted on your end. Yeah, I actually only really know about her work from this book, and I'm just now finding out about like what other stuff that she's done and how important of a figure she was in science fiction in the latter half of the 20th century. It's very interesting to find out. So I've read a little bit out of this book before. Thanks, Tech. I've read a little bit out of this book before and I really enjoy it. And so I think maybe we'll just start with that and see where it takes us. And I'll be adjusting some knobs and switches over here every once in a while. Okay, so without much further ado, well, get yourself a tea or a coffee or something if you don't have one already, maybe. But cheers. Thanks for coming by, guys, for this little experiment. And let's get into it. Changing Planes by Ursula K. Le Guin. Sita Dulip's method. The range of the airplane, a few thousand miles, the other side of the world, coconut palms, glaciers, the poles, a llama, etc., is pitifully limited compared to the vast extent and variety of experience provided to those who know how to use it by the airport. Airplanes are cramped, jammed, hectic, noisy, germy, alarming, and boring. And they serve unusually nasty food at utterly unreasonable intervals. Airports, though larger, share the crowding, vile air, noise, and relentless tension, while their food is often even nastier, consisting entirely of fried lumps of something, and the places one has to eat it in are suicidally depressing. On the airplane, everyone is locked into a seat with a belt and can move only during short periods when they are allowed to stand in line, waiting to empty their bladders until, just before they reach the toilet cubicle, a nagging loudspeaker harries them back to belted immobility. In the airport, luggage-laden people rush hither and yon through endless corridors, like souls to each of whom the devil has furnished a different, inaccurate map of the escape route from hell. These rushing people are watched by people who sit in plastic seats bolted to the floor, and who might just as well be bolted to the seats. So far, then, the airport and the airplane are equal, in the way that the bottom of one septic tank is equal, all in all, to the bottom of the next septic tank. If both you and your plane are on time, the airport is merely a diffuse, short, miserable prelude to the intense, long, miserable plane ride. But what if there's 5 hours between your arrival and your connecting flight? Or your plane is late arriving and you've missed your connection? Or the connecting flight is late, or the staff of another airline are striking for a wage benefit package, and the government has not ordered out the National Guard to control this threat to international capitalism, so your airline staff is trying to handle twice as many people as usual. Or there are tornadoes or thunderstorms or blizzards or little important bits of the plane missing, or any of the 1,000 other reasons, never under any circumstances the fault of the airlines and rarely explained at the time. Why those who go places on airplanes sit and sit and sit and sit and sit in airports, not going anywhere? In this, probably its true aspect, the airport is not a prelude to travel, not a place of transition. It is a stop, a blockage, a constipation. The airport is where you can't go anywhere else. A non-place in which time does not pass and there is no hope of any meaningful existence. A terminus. The end. The airport offers nothing to any human being except access to the interval between planes. It was Sita Dulip of Cincinnati who first realized this and so discovered the interplanar technique most of us now use. Her connecting flight from Chicago to Denver had been delayed by some unspeakable, or at any rate untold, malfunction of the airplane. It was listed as departing at 1:10, 2 hours late. At 1:55, it was listed as departing at 3 o'clock. It was then taken off the departures list. There was no one at the gate to answer questions. The lines at the desks were 8 miles long, only slightly shorter than the lines at the toilets. Sita Dulip had eaten a nasty lunch standing up at a dirty plastic counter, since the few tables were all occupied by wretched, whimpering children with savagely punitive parents, or by huge hairy youths wearing shorts, tank tops, and rubber thongs. She had long ago read the editorials in the local newspaper, which advocated using the education budget to build more prisons, and applauded the recent tax break for citizens whose income surpassed that of Romania. The airport bookstores did not sell books, only bestsellers, which Sita Dulip cannot read without risking a severe systemic reaction. She'd been sitting for over an hour on the blue plastic chair with metal tubes for legs bolted to the floor in a row of people sitting in blue plastic chairs with metal tubes for legs bolted to the floor facing a row of people sitting in blue plastic chairs with metal tubes for legs bolted to the floor when, as she later said, it came to me. She had discovered that by a mere kind of twist and slipping bend, easier to do than to describe, she could go anywhere, be anywhere, because she was already between planes. She found herself in strip suits, that easily accessible and picturesque, though somewhat three-dimensional region of waterspouts and volcanoes, still a favorite with beginning interplanetary travelers. In her inexperience, she was nervous about missing her flight and stayed only an hour or two before returning to the airport. She saw at once that, on this plane, her absence had taken practically no time at all. Delighted, she slipped off again and found herself in Dieo. She spent 2 nights at a small hotel run by the Interplanetary Agency, with a balcony overlooking the amber sea of Somu. She went for long walks on the beach, swam in the chill, buoyant, golden water, like swimming in brandy and soda, she said, and got acquainted with some pleasant visitors from other planes. The small and inoffensive natives of Dieo, who take no interest in anyone else and never come down to the ground, squatted high in the crowns of the alm palms, bargaining, gossiping, and singing soft, quick love songs to one another. When she reluctantly returned to the airport to check up, 9 or 10 minutes had passed. Her flight was soon called. She flew to Denver to her younger sister's wedding. On the flight home, she missed her connection at Chicago and spent a week on CHUM, where she has often returned since. Her job with an advertising agency involves a good deal of air travel, and by now she speaks Chumwat like a native. Sita taught several friends, of whom I am happy to be one, how to change planes. And so the technique, the method, has gradually spread out from Cincinnati. Others on our plane may well have discovered it for themselves, since it appears that a good many of people now practice it, though not always intentionally. One meets them here and there. While staying with the Asonu, I met a man from the Candensian plane, which is very much like ours, only more of it consists of Toronto. He told me that in order to change planes, all a Candensian has to do is eat 2 dill pickles, tighten his belt, sit upright in a hard chair with his back not touching the back, and breathe 10 times a minute for about 10 minutes. This is enviably easy compared to our technique. We, I mean people from the plane I occupy when not traveling, seem unable to change planes except at airports. The Interplanary Agency long ago established that a specific combination of tense misery, indigestion, and boredom is the essential facilitator of interplanetary travel. But most people, from most planes, don't have to suffer the way we do. The following reports and descriptions of other planes given to me by friends or written from notes I made on my own excursions and in libraries of various kinds may induce the reader to try interplanetary travel. Or if not, they may at least help to pass an hour in an airport. Porridge on Islak. It must be admitted that the method invented by Sita Dulip is not entirely reliable. You sometimes find yourself on a plane that isn't the one you meant to go to. If whenever you travel you carry with you a copy of Ronan's handy planary guide, you can read up on wherever it is you get to when you get there, though Ronan is not always reliable either. No problem, Bamsel. Welcome in. I'm trying something different today, reading some stories. We're visiting some other planes with Ursula K. Le Guin. But the Encyclopedia Planaria in 44 volumes is not portable, and after all, what is entirely reliable unless it's dead? I arrived on Islak unintentionally, when I was inexperienced, before I had learned to tuck Ronan into my suitcase. Reading stream, that's right. First time. Thanks so much for the resub, Bamsel. The Interplanary Hotel there did have a set of the encyclopedia, but it was at the bindery because they said the bears had eaten the glue in the bindings and the books had all come to pieces. Glad to hear it, Bamsel. I thought they must have rather odd bears on Islak, but did not like to ask them about it. I looked around the walls and my room carefully in case any bears were lurking. It was a beautiful hotel and the hosts were pleasant, so I decided to take my luck as it came and spend a day or two on Islak. I got to looking over the books in the bookcase in my room and trying out the built-in legomit, and had quite forgotten about bears when something scuttled behind a bookend. I moved the bookend and glimpsed the scuttler. It was dark and furry, but had a long, thin tail of some kind, almost like wire. It was 6 or 8 inches long, but not counting the tail. I didn't much like sharing my room with it, but I hate complaining to strangers. You can only complain satisfactorily to people you know really well. So I moved the heavy bookend over the hole in the wall the creature had disappeared into and went down to dinner. The hotel served family style, and all the guests ate at one long table. They were a friendly lot from several different planes. We were able to converse in pairs using our translatomats, though general conversation overloaded the circuits. My left-hand neighbor, a rosy lady from a plane she called Ayes, said she and her husband came to Izlik quite often. I asked her if she knew anything about the bears here. Yes, she said, smiling and nodding. They're quite harmless. But what little pests they are, spoiling books and licking envelopes and snuggling in the bed. Snuggling in the bed? Yes, yes. They were pets, you see. Her husband leaned forward to talk to me around her. He was a rosy gentleman. Teddy bears, he said in English, smiling. Yes. Teddy bears? Yes, yes, he said. And then he had to resort to his own language. Teddy bears are little animal pets for children, isn't that right? But they're not live animals. He looked dismayed. Dead animals? No, stuffed animals, toys. Yes, yes, toys, pets, he said, smiling and nodding. We wanted to talk about his visit to my plane. He had been to San Francisco and liked it very much, and we talked about earthquakes instead of teddy bears. He had found a 5.6 earthquake a very charming experience, very enjoyable, and he and his wife and I laughed a great deal as he told about it. They were certainly a nice couple with a positive outlook. When I went back to my room, I shoved my suitcase up against the bookend that blocked the hole in the wall and lay in bed hoping that the teddy bears did not have a back door. Nothing snuggled into the bed with me that night. I woke up very early, being jet-lagged by flying from London to Chicago, where my westbound flight had been delayed, allowing me this vacation. It was a lovely warm morning, the sun just rising. I got up and went out to take the air and see the city of Slas on the Izlik plain. It might have been a big city on my plane, nothing exotic to my eye, except the buildings were more mixed in style and size than ours. That is, we put the big imposing buildings at the center and on the nice streets, and the small humble ones in the neighborhoods or barrios or slums or shanty towns. In this residential quarter of Slas, big houses were all jumbled up together, with tiny cottages, some of them hardly bigger than hutches. When I went the other direction, downtown, I found the same wild variation of scale in the office buildings. A massive old 4-story granite block towered over a 10-story building of 10 feet wide, with floors only 5 or 6 feet apart, a doll's skyscraper. By then, however, enough Izlai were out and about that the buildings didn't puzzle me as much as the people did. They were amazingly various in size and color and shape. A woman who must have been 8 feet tall swept past me, literally. She was a street sweeper, busily and gracefully clearing the sidewalk of dust. She had what I took to be a spare broom or duster, a great spray of feathers tucked into her waistband and back like an ostrich's tail. Next came a businessman striding along, hooked up to the computer network via a plug in his ear. a mouthpiece, and the left frame of his spectacles, talking away as he studied the market report. He came up about to my waist. 4 young men passed on the other side of the street. There was nothing odd about them except that they all looked exactly alike. Then came a child trotting to school with his little backpack. He trotted on all 4s, neatly, his hands in leather mitts or boots that protected them from the pavement. He was pale with small eyes and a snout, but he was adorable. A sidewalk cafe had just opened up beside a park downtown. Though ignorant of what the Islay ate for breakfast, I was ravenous, ready to dare anything edible. I held out my translatomat to the waitress, a worn-looking woman of 40 or so with nothing unusual about her to my eye, but the beauty of her thick, yellow, fancifully braided hair. "Please tell me what a foreigner eats for breakfast," I said. She laughed, then smiled a beautiful, kind smile and said, via the translatomat, "Well, you have to tell me that. We eat kledif, or fruit with kledif." "Fruit with kledif, please," I said, and presently she brought me a plate of delicious-looking fruits in a large bowl of pale yellow gruel, smooth and about as thick as very heavy cream, lukewarm. It sounds ghastly, but it was delicious. Mild but subtle, lightly filling and slightly stimulating, like café au lait. She waited to see if I liked it. "I'm sorry, I didn't think to ask if you were a carnivore," she said. "Carnivores have raw kullis for breakfast, or kledif with offal." "This is fine," I said. Nobody else was in the place, and she had taken a liking to me, as I to her. "May I ask where you come from?" she asked, and so we got to talking. Her name was Aili Ali. I soon realized that she was not only an intelligent person, but a highly educated one. She had a degree in plant pathology, but was lucky, she said, to have a job as a waitress. "Since the ban," she said, shrugging. When she saw that I didn't know what the ban was, she was about to tell me, but several customers were sitting down now. A great bull of a man at one table, 2 mousy girls at another, and she had to go wait on them. "I wish we could go on talking," I said, and she said with her kind smile, "Well, if you come back at 16, I can sit and talk with you." "I will," I said, and I did. After wandering around the park and the city, I went back to the hotel for lunch and a nap, then took the monorail back downtown. I never saw such a variety of people as were in that car. All shapes, sizes, colors, degrees of hairiness, furriness, featheriness. The street sweeper's tail had indeed been a tail. And I thought, looking at one long, greenish youth, even leafiness. Surely those were fronds over his ears. He was whispering to himself as the warm wind swept through the car from the open windows. The only thing the Islay seemed to have in common, unfortunately, was poverty. The city certainly had been prosperous once, not very long ago. The monorail was a snazzy bit of engineering, but it was showing wear and tear. The surviving old buildings, which were on a scale I found familiar, were grand but run down, and crowded by the more recent giants' houses and dolls' houses and buildings like stables or mews, or rabbit hutches. A terrible hodgepodge, all of it cheaply built, rickety-looking, shabby. The Islai themselves were shabby, when they weren't downright ragged. Some of the furrier and featherier ones were clothed only by their fur and feathers. The green boy wore a modest apron, but his rough trunk and limbs were bare. This was a country in deep, hard economic trouble. Ali was sitting at one of the outside tables at the cafe, next door to the one where she waited tables. She smiled and beckoned to me, and I sat down with her. She had a small bowl of chilled kledif with sweet spices, and I ordered the same. "Please tell me about the band," I asked her. "We used to look like you," she said. "What happened?" "Well," she said and hesitated, "we like science. We like engineering. We are good engineers, but perhaps we are not very good scientists." To summarize her story, the Islai had been strong on practical physics, agriculture, architecture, urban development, engineering, invention, but weak in the life sciences, history, and theory. They had their Edisons and Fords, but no Darwin, no Mendel. When their airports got to be just like ours, if not worse, they began to travel between planes. And on some plane, about 100 years ago, one of their scientists discovered applied genetics. He brought it home. It fascinated them. They promptly mastered its principles. Or perhaps they had not quite mastered them before they started applying them to every life form within reach. First, she said, to plants. Altering food plants to be more fruitful, or to resist bacteria and viruses, or to kill insects, and so on. I nodded. We're doing a good deal of that too," I said. "Really, are you?" She seemed not to know how to ask the question she wanted to ask. "I'm corn, myself," she said at last, shyly. I checked the translatomat. Uslu, corn, maize. I checked the dictionary, and it said that Uslu on Islak and maize on my planet were the same plant. I knew that the odd thing about corn is that it has no wild form, only a distant wild ancestor that you'd never recognize as corn. It's entirely a construct of long-term breeding by ancient gatherers and farmers. An early genetic miracle. But what did that have to do with Aili Ale? Aili Ale, with her wonderful thick golden-colored, corn-colored hair cascading in braids from a top knot. Only 4% of my genome, she said. There's about 0.5% of parrot, too, but it's recessive. Thank God. I was still trying to absorb what she had told me. I think she felt her question had been answered by my astonished silence. They were utterly irresponsible, she said severely. With all their programs and policies and making everything better, they were fools. They let all kinds of things get loose and interbreed, wiped out rice in 1 decade. The improved breeds went sterile. The famines were terrible. Butterflies. We used to have butterflies. Do you have them? Some, still, I said. And Deletu, a kind of singing firefly now extinct, said my translatomat. I shook my head wistfully. She shook her head wistfully. I never saw a butterfly or a Deletu, only pictures. The insecticidal clones got them. But the scientists learned nothing. Nothing. They set about improving the animals, improving us. Dogs that could talk, cats that could play chess, human beings who were going to be all geniuses and never get sick and live 500 years. They did all that. Oh, yeah. They did all that. There were talking dogs all over the place. Unbelievably boring they are. On and on and on and on about sex and shit and smells and shit and sex. And do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? I can't stand talking dogs. My big poodle Rover, he never says a word, the dear good soul. And then the humans will never, ever get rid of the Premier. He's a healthy, a bloody Gappa. He's 90 now and looks 30. And he'll go on looking 30 and being Premier for 4 more centuries. He's a pious hypocrite and a greedy, petty, stupid, mean-minded crook. Just the kind of man who ought to be siring children for 5 centuries. The ban doesn't apply to him, but still, I'm not going to say the ban was wrong. They had to do something. Things were really awful 50 years ago, when they realized that genetic hackers had infiltrated all the laboratories, and half the techs were biased fanatics, and the Godstone Church had all those secret factories in the Eastern Hemisphere deliberately turning out genetic melds. Of course, most of those products weren't viable, but a lot of them were. The hackers were so good at it. The chicken people, you've seen them? As soon as she asked, I realized that I had. Short, squat people who ran around in intersections squawking so that all the traffic gridlocked in an attempt not to run them over. They just make me want to cry, Ali said, as if she wanted to cry. So the ban forbade further experimentation, I asked. She nodded. Yes, actually they blew up the laboratories and sent the biased for re-education in the Gooby, and jailed all the gods and fathers, and most of the mothers too, I guess, and shot the geneticists, and destroyed all the experiments in progress, and the products, if they were, she shrugged, too far from the norm. The norm, she scowled, though her sunny face was not made for scowling. We don't have a norm anymore. We don't have species anymore. We're a genetic porridge. When we plant maize, it comes up weevil-repellent clover that smells like chlorine. When we plant an oak, it comes up poison oak 50 feet high with a 10-foot trunk. And when we make love, we don't know if we're going to have a baby, or a foal, or a cygnet, or a sapling. My daughter, and she paused. Her face worked and she had to compress her lips before she could go on. My daughter lives in the North Sea, on raw fish. She's very beautiful, dark and silky and beautiful, but I had to take her to the seacoast when she was 2 years old. I had to put her in that cold water, those big waves. I had to let her swim away, let her go be what she is. But she is human too. She is human too. She was crying and so was I. After a while, Ale went on to tell me how the genome collapse had led to profound economic depression, only worsened by the purity clauses of the ban, which restricted jobs in the professions and government to those who had tested 99.44% human, with exceptions for healthies, righteous ones, and other GAPAs, genetically altered products approved by the emergency government. This was why she was working as a waitress. She was only 4% maize. Maize was once the holy plant of many people where I come from, I said, hardly knowing what I said. It is such a beautiful plant. I love everything made out of corn. Polenta, hoe cake, cornbread, tortillas, canned corn, creamed corn, hominy grits, corn whiskey, corn chowder on the cob, tamales. It's all good, all kind, all sacred. I hope you don't mind if I talk about eating it. Oh, heavens no, said Ale, smiling. What did you think Clediff was made of? I asked her about the teddy bears. That phrase, of course, meant nothing to her, but when I described the creature in any bookcase, she nodded. "Oh yes, book bears." Early on, when the genetic designers were making everything better, they dwarfed bears down, way down, for children's pets. Like toys, stuffed animals, only they were alive. Programmed to be passive and affectionate. But some of the genes they used for dwarfing came from insects, springtails and earwigs, and the bears began to eat the children's books. At night, while they were supposed to be cuddling in bed with the children, they'd go eat their books. They liked paper and glue, and when they bred, the offspring had long tails like wires and a sort of insect jaw, so they weren't much good for children anymore. But by then they'd escaped into the woodwork, between the walls. Some people call them bear wigs. I've been back to Islik several times to see Ali Ale. It is not a happy plane, or a reassuring one, but I would go to worse planes than Islik to see so kind a smile, such a top knot of gold, and to drink maize with the woman who is maize. Hello, Naviri. We're doing a little reading stream today. Trying something out. The silence of the Asanu. The silence of the Asanu is proverbial. The first visitors to their plane believed that these gracious, gracile people were mute, lacking any language other than that of gesture, expression, and gaze. Later, hearing Asanu children chatter, the visitors suspected that among themselves the adults spoke, keeping silence only with strangers. We know now that the Asanu are not dumb, but that once past early childhood they speak very rarely to anyone under any circumstances. They do not write, and unlike mutes or monks under vows of silence. Welcome in, New Future Fantasy and Raiders. We're doing something a little differently tonight than usual. I'm reading some short stories with a little synth ambience here. We're reading some short stories from Ursula K. Le Guin out of a book called Changing Planes. We just started reading a story about her visiting the plane of the Asanu and their proverbial silence. Maybe you'd like to stick around and hear about it with us. And if you were expecting something else and need to carry on, then no hard feelings. Thank you for the follows. That's right, Targus. I felt like reading tonight, and I thought if I do it on stream, then it might be fun, and I might have better chances of actually staying awake than I usually do when I try to read late at night. So far, it's working pretty well, at least as far as that aspect goes. Hello, Didbox. So, just to very briefly recap, the premise of the book is that when you're stuck in an airport, it's actually possible to change planes in the sense of moving to a different plane of existence by performing certain actions when you have a long layover. And the narrator of the book is talking about some different planes that she's visited using this technique. And I think I'll restart this one that we just started since it was, we're only about one paragraph in, so you can get the beginning. The silence of the Asanu. The silence of the Asanu is proverbial. The first visitors to their plane believed that these gracious, gracile people were mute, lacking any language other than that of gesture, expression, and gaze. Later, hearing Asanu children chatter, the visitors suspected that among themselves, the adults spoke, keeping silence only with strangers. We know now that the Asanu are not dumb, but that once past early childhood, they speak very rarely to anyone under any circumstances. They do not write, and unlike mutes or monks under vows of silence, they do not use any signs or other devices in place of speaking. This nearly absolute abstinence from language makes them fascinating. People who live with animals value the charm of muteness. It can be a real pleasure to know when the cat walks into the room that he won't mention any of your shortcomings, or that you can tell your grievances to your dog without his repeating them to people who caused them. Those who can't talk and those who can talk but don't have the great advantage over the rest of us in that they never say anything stupid. This may be why we are convinced that if they spoke, they would have something wise to say. Hello, New Few. New Few. I guess New Few is also accurate, but New Fu. We're doing something different tonight. A bit of a reading stream, just trying it out. Hello, Knox. Thus there has come to be considerable tourist traffic to the Asanu. Having a strong tradition of hospitality, the Asanu entertain their visitors with generosity and courtesy, though without modifying their own customs. Thanks, guys. Some tourists go there simply in order to join the natives in their silence, grateful to spend a few weeks where they did not have to festoon and obscure every human meeting with verbiage. Many such visitors, having been accepted into a household as a paying guest, return year after year, forming bonds of unspoken affection with their quiet hosts. Others follow their Asanu guides or hosts about, talking to them hour after hour, confiding their whole life to them in rapture at having at last found a listener who won't interrupt or comment or mention that his cousin had an even larger tumor than that. As such people usually know little Asanu and speak entirely in their own language, they evidently aren't worried by the question that vexes some visitors. Since the Asanu don't talk, do they, in fact, listen? They certainly hear and understand what is said to them in their own language, since they're prompt to respond to their children, to indicate directions by gesture to the halting and mispronounced inquiries of tourists, and to leave a building at the cry of fire. But the question remains, do they listen to discursive speech and sociable conversation? Or do they merely hear it while keeping silently attentive to something beyond speech? Their amiable and apparently easy manner seems to some observers the placid surface of a deep preoccupation, a constant alertness, like that of a mother who, while entertaining her guests or seeing to her husband's comfort, is listening every moment for the cry of her baby in another room. To perceive the Asanu thus is almost inevitably to interpret their silence as a concealment. As they grow up, it seems, they cease to speak because they are listening to something we do not hear, a secret which their silence hides. Some visitors to their world are convinced that the lips of these quiet people are locked upon a knowledge which, in proportion as it is hidden, must be valuable, a spiritual treasure, a speech beyond speech, possibly even that ultimate revelation promised by so many religions and indeed frequently delivered, but never in a wholly communicable form. The transcendent knowledge of the mystic cannot be expressed in language. It may be that the Asanu avoid language for this very reason. It may be that they keep silence because if they spoke, everything of importance would have been said. Believers in the wisdom of the Asanu have followed individuals about for years, waiting for the rare words they speak, writing them down, saving them, studying them, arranging them, and collating them, finding arcane meanings and numerical correspondences in them, in search of the hidden message. To some, however, these utterances do not seem to be as momentous as one might expect from the rarity. They might even be described as banal. There is no written form of the Asanu language, and translation of speech is considered to be so uncertain that translatomats aren't issued to the tourists, most of whom don't want them anyway. Those who wish to learn Asanu can only do so by listening to and imitating children, who by 6 or 7 years old are already becoming unhappy when asked to talk. Hey, Keshaka, thank you so much. Thanks so much for the gift sub, and thank you guys for the kind words. I'm glad that some people are enjoying this. Here are the 11 sayings of the elder of Isu, collected over 4 years by a devotee from Ohio, who had already spent 6 years learning the language from the children of the Isu group. Months of silence occurred between most of these statements, and 2 years between the 5th and 6th. Number 1, not there. Number 2, it is almost ready, or be ready for it soon. 3. Unexpected. 4. It will never cease. 5. Yes. 6. When? 7. It is very good. 8. Perhaps. 9. Soon. 10. Hot or very warm. 11. It will not cease. The devotee wove these 11 sayings into a coherent spiritual statement or testament which he understood the elder to have been making little by little during the last 4 years of his life. The Ohio reading of the sayings of the elder of Isu is as follows. 1. What we seek is not in any object or experience of our mortal life. We live among appearances, on the verge of the spiritual truth. 2. We must be as ready for it as it is ready for us, for 3. It will come when we least expect it. Our perception of the truth is sudden as a lightning flash, but 4. The truth itself is eternal and unchanging. 5. Indeed, we must positively and hopefully, in a spirit of affirmation, 6. Continually ask when. When shall we find what we seek? 7. For the truth is the medicine for our soul, the knowledge of absolute goodness. 8 and 9. It may come very soon. Perhaps it is coming even now in this moment. 10. Its warmth and brightness are as those of the sun, but the sun will perish. 11. And the truth will not perish. Never will the warmth, the brightness, the goodness of the truth cease or fail us. Another interpretation of the sayings may be made by referring to the circumstances in which the elder spoke, faithfully recorded by the devotee from Ohio, whose patience was equaled only by the elders. Hey Heartblood, thank you so much for the resub. Can't believe it's been 4 months already. We're trying something new tonight. We're doing a reading stream. I'm reading some short stories from this book by Ursula K. Le Guin. We're talking about the Asanu, a people who, after moving past the age of 5 or 6, great, no longer speak. I'm actually only familiar with her work from this book that I picked up kind of on a whim, and I've only recently been finding out about who she is and her importance for sci-fi stories and things like that. So it's very nice. I'm very much enjoying it. Another interpretation of the sayings may be made by referring to the circumstances in which the elder spoke, faithfully recorded by the devotee from Ohio, whose patience was equaled only by the elders. Take care, Nufu. 1. Spoken in an undertone as the elder looked through a chest of clothing and ornaments. 2. Spoken to a group of children on the morning of a ceremony. 3. Said with a laugh and greeting, the younger elder's sister, returned from a long trip. 4. Spoken the day after the burial of the elder's sister. 5. Said while embracing the elder's brother-in-law some days after the funeral. 6. Asked of an Asanu doctor who was making a spirit body, drawing in white and black sand for the elder. These drawings seem to be both curative and diagnostic, but we know very little about them. The observer states that the doctor's answer was a short curving line drawn outward from the navel of the spirit body figure. This, however, may only be the observer's reading of what was not an answer at all. 7. Said to a child who had woven a reed mat. 8. Spoken in answer to a young grandchild who asked, "Will you be at the big feast, grandmother?" 9. Spoken in answer to the same child who asked, "Are you going to be dead like great-auntie?" 10. Said to a baby who was toddling towards a fire pit where the flames were invisible in the sunlight. 11. Last words spoken the day before the elder's death. The last 6 sayings were all spoken in the last half year of the elder's life. As if the approach of death had made the elder positively loquacious. 5 of the sayings were spoken to, or at least in the presence of young children who were still at the talking stage. Speech from an adult must be very impressive to an Asanu child. Like the foreign linguists, Asanu babies learn the language by listening to older children. The mother and other adults encourage the child to speak only by attentive listening and prompt, affectionate, wordless response. The Asanu live in close-knit, extended family groups in frequent contact with other groups. Their pasturing life, following the great flocks of Anamanu, which furnish them wool, leather, milk, and meat, leads them on a ceaseless seasonal nomadic circuit within a vast shared territory of mountains and foothills. Families frequently leave their groups to go wandering and visiting. At the great festivals and ceremonies of healing and renewal, many groups come together for days or weeks, exchanging hospitality. No hostile relations between groups are apparent, and in fact, no observer has reported seeing adult Asanu fight or quarrel. Arguments, clearly, are out of the question. Children from 2 to 6 years old chatter to each other constantly. They argue, wrangle, bicker, quarrel, and sometimes come to blows. As they reach 6 or 7, they begin to speak less and quarrel less. By the time they are 8 or 9, most of them are very shy of words and reluctant to answer a question, except by gesture. They have learned to quietly evade inquiring tourists and linguists with notebooks and recording devices. By adolescence, they are as silent and as peaceable as the adults. Children between 8 and 12 do most of the looking after the younger ones. All the sub-adolescent children of the family group go about together, and in such groups, the 2 and 6-year-olds provide language models for the babies. Older children shout wordlessly in the excitement of a game of tag or hide and seek, and sometimes scold an errant toddler with a "stop" or "no," just as the elder of Isu murmured "hot" when a child approached an invisible fire. Though of course the elder may have been using that circumstance as a parable in order to make a statement of profound spiritual meaning, as appears in the Ohio reading. Even songs lose their words as the singers grow older. A game rhyme sung by little children has the words, "Look at us, tumble down, stumble down, tumble down. All of us tumble down, all in a heap." The 5 and 6-year-olds pass the words of the song along to the little ones. Older children cheerfully play the games, falling into wriggling child heaps with yells of joy. But they do not sing the words, only the tune, vocalized on a neutral syllable. Adult Asanu often hum or sing at work while herding, while rocking the baby. Some of the tunes are traditional, others improvised. Many employ motifs based on the whistles of the Anamanu. None of the songs have words. They are all hummed or vocalized. At the meetings of the clans and at marriages and funerals, the ceremonial choral music is rich in melody and harmonically complex and subtle. No instruments are used, only the voice. The singers practice many days for the ceremonies. Some students of the music of the Asanu believe that their particular spiritual wisdom or insight finds its expression in these great wordless chorals. I am inclined to agree with others who, having lived a long time among the Asanu, believe that their group singing is an element of a sacred occasion, and certainly an art, a festive communal act, and a pleasurable release of feeling. But no more. What is sacred to them remains in silence. The little children people call by relationship words, mother, uncle, clan sister, friend, etc. If the Asanu have names, we do not know them. About 10 years ago, a zealous believer in the secret wisdom of the Asanu kidnapped a child of 4 from one of the mountain clans in the dead of winter. He had obtained a zoo collector's permit and smuggled her back to our plane in an animal cage marked Anamanu. Believing that the Asanu enforced silence upon their children, his plan was to encourage the little girl to keep talking as she grew up. When adult, he thought, she would thus be able to speak the innate wisdom which her people would have obliged her to keep secret. For the first year or so, she would talk to her kidnapper, who, aside from the abnormal cruelty of his action, seems to have begun by treating her kindly enough. His knowledge of the Asanu language was limited, and he saw no one else here but a small group of sectarians who came to gaze worshipfully at her and listen to her talk. Her vocabulary and syntax gained no enlargement and began to atrophy. She became increasingly silent. Frustrated, the zealot decided to teach her English so that she would be able to express her innate wisdom in a different tongue. We have only his report, which is that she refused to learn, was silent or spoke almost inaudibly when he tried to make her repeat words, and did not obey. He ceased to let other people see her. When some members of the sect finally notified the civil authorities, the child was about 7. She had spent 3 years hidden in a basement room. For a year or more, she had been whipped or beaten regularly to teach her to talk, her captor explained, because she's stubborn. She was cowering, undernourished, and brutalized. She promptly returned to her family, who for 3 years had mourned her, believing she had wandered off and been lost on a glacier. They received her with tears of joy and grief. Her condition since then is not known because the interplanetary agency closed the entire area to all visitors, tourists, or scientists at the time she was brought back. No foreigner has been in the Asanu Mountains since. We may well imagine that her people were resentful, but nothing was ever said. Thanks, Heartblood. Take care, Heartblood. Good night. Feeling at home with the Hennebit. I expect people who don't look like me to not be like me. A reasonable expectation as expectations go. But it makes my mind slow to admit that people who look like me may not be like me. The Hennebit look remarkably like me. That is to say, not only are they the same general shape and size as people on my plane with fingers and toes and ears and all the other bits we check a baby for, but they also have pallid skin, dark hair, and near-sighted eyes of mixed brown and green and rather short, stocky figures. Their posture is terrible. The young ones are bright and agile. The old ones are thoughtful and forgetful. An unadventurous and timid people, fond of landscape and inclined to run away from strangers. They are monogamous, hard-working, slightly dyspeptic, and deeply domestic. When I first came to their plane, I felt at home at once, and perhaps since I looked like one of them, and even in some respects acted like one of them, the Hennebit did not show any inclination to run away from me. I stayed a week at the hostel. The interplanetary agency, which has existed for several kalpas, maintains hostels, inns, and luxury hotels in many popular regions while protecting vulnerable areas from intrusion. Then I moved to the home of a widow who supported her family by offering room and board to a few people, all of them natives but me. The widow, her 2 teenage children, the 3 other boarders, and I all ate breakfast and dinner together, and so I found myself a member of a native household. They were certainly kindly people, and Mrs. Nanatulu was an excellent cook. The Hennebit language is notoriously difficult, but I struggled along with it with the help of the translatomat provided by the agency. I soon felt that I was beginning to know my hosts. They were not really distrustful. Their shyness was mostly a defense of their privacy. When they saw I wasn't invasive, they unstiffened, and I unstiffened by making myself useful. Once I convinced Mrs. Nanatulu that I really wanted to help in the kitchen, she was happy to have a chef's apprentice. Mr. Batanella needed a listener, and I listened to him talk about politics. Hennebit is a socialist democracy run mainly by committees, not very efficiently perhaps, but at least not disastrously. And I traded informal language lessons with Tenego and Anup, nice adolescents. Tenego wanted to be a biologist, and her brother had a gift for languages. My translatomat was useful, but I learned most of what Hennebit I learned by teaching Anup English. When Tenego and Anup, I seldom felt the disorientation that would come over me every now and then in conversation with the adults. A sense that I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about, and that there had been an abrupt, immense discontinuity in comprehension. At first I blamed it on my poor grasp of the language, but it was more than that. There were gaps. Suddenly the Hennebit were on the other side of the gap, totally out of reach. This happened particularly often when I talked with my fellow boarder, the old Mrs. Tatava. We'd start out fine, chatting about the weather or the news or her embroidery stitches. And then all at once, the discontinuity would occur right in the midst of a sentence. I find leaf stitch nice for filling odd-shaped areas, but it was such a job painting the whole building with little leaves, I thought we'd never finish it. What building was that? I said. Hali Tuduvi, she said placidly, threading her needle. I had never heard the word Tutuvi before. My translatomat gave it as a shrine, sacred enclosure, but had nothing for Hali. I went to the library and looked it up in the Encyclopedia of Hennebit. Hali, it said, had been a practice of the people of the Ebo Peninsula in the previous millennium. Also, there was a folk dance called the Hali Hali. Miss Tatava was standing halfway up the stairs with a rapt expression. I said good day. Imagine the number of them, she said. Of what? I asked cautiously. The feet, she said, smiling. One after another, such a dance, so long a dance. After several of these excursions, I asked Mrs. Nanatula, in a circuitous fashion, if Mrs. Tatava was having a problem with her memory. Mrs. Nanatula, chopping greens for the Tumum Hoa, laughed and said, "Oh, she's not all there, not at all." I said, some conventionality, "What a pity." My hostess glanced at me with faint puzzlement, but pursued her thought, still smiling. She says we're married. I love to talk with her. It's a real honor to have so much Abba in the house, don't you think? I feel very lucky. I knew Abba. It was a common shrub, an evergreen. We used Abba berries, pungent, a bit like juniper, in certain dishes. There was an Abba bush in the backyard and a little jar of the dried berries in the cupboard. But I didn't think the house was full of them. I brooded over Miss Tatava's Hali shrine. I knew of no shrines at all in Hennebit, except the little niche in the living room where Mrs. Nanatula always kept a few flowers or reeds or, come to think of it, a sprig of Abba. I asked her if the niche had a name, and she said it was the Tutuva. Gathering courage, I asked Mrs. Tatava, "Where is the Hali Tutuva?" She did not answer for a while. "Quite far away these days," she said at last, with a faraway look. Her gaze brightened a little as it returned to me. "Were you there?" "No." "It's so hard to be sure," she said. "Do you know I never say I wasn't anywhere anymore because so often it turns out that I am, or are, as I should say, shouldn't we? It was very beautiful. Oh, that was so far away. And all along it's right here now." She looked at me with cheer and pleasure. I could not help smiling and feeling happy, though I had not the faintest idea what she was talking about. Indeed, I had begun to notice that the people of my household, and the Hennebit in general, were very much less like me than I had assumed. It was a matter of temperament, of temper. They were temperate. They were well-tempered. They were good-tempered. It was not a virtue, an ethical triumph. They simply were good-natured people. Very different from me. Mr. Batanel talked politics with gusto and energy, with a lively interest in the problems, but it seemed to me that there was something missing, some element I was used to considering part of a political talk. He didn't shift about as some weak-minded folk do, adapting his views to his interlocutors. But he never seemed to defend any particular view of his own. Everything was left open. He would have been the most dismal failure on a radio call-in talk show or TV experts roundtable. He lacked moral outrage. He seemed to have no convictions. Did he even have opinions? I often went with him to the corner grog shop and listened to him discussing issues of policy with his friends, several of whom served on governing committees. All of them listened, considered, spoke, often with animation and excitement, interrupting one another to make their points. They got quite passionate, but they never got angry. Nobody ever contradicted anybody, even in such subtle ways as meeting an assertion with silence. Yet they didn't seem to be trying to avoid dissension, or to conform their ideas to a norm, or to work towards a consensus. And most puzzling of all, these political discussions. Welcome in, Elmid Kelmu. I'll agree with that statement. Thanks, Targus. And most puzzling of all, these political discussions would suddenly dissolve into laughter. Chuckles, belly laughs, sometimes the whole group ending up gasping and wiping their eyes, as if discussing how to run the country was the same thing as sitting around telling funny stories. I never could get the joke. Listening on the networks, I never once heard a committee member state that anything must be done. The country seemed to run quite smoothly. Taxes were collected, garbage was collected, potholes were repaved. Nobody went hungry. Elections were held at frequent intervals. Local votes on this and that issue were always being announced on the networks, with informative material supplied. Mrs. Nanatula and Mr. Banatel always voted. The children often voted. When I realized some people had more votes than others, I was shocked. Anup told me that Mrs. Tatava had 18 votes, although she usually didn't bother to cast any, and probably could have 30 or 40 if she'd bothered to register. But why does she have more votes than other people? Well, she's old, you know. He was touchingly modest when he gave me information or corrected my misunderstandings. They all were. They acted as if they were reminding me of something I knew that had slipped my mind. He tried to explain, like, you know, I only have one vote. So, as you get older, you're supposed to be wiser? He looked uncertain. Or they honor the elderly by giving them more votes? Well, you already have them, you know, Anup said. They come back to you, you know? Or you come back to them, actually, Mother says. If you can keep them in mind. The other votes you had. I must have looked blank as a brick wall. When you know, were living again. He did not say living before. He said living again. People remember their other lives, I said, and looked for confirmation. Anup thought it over. I guess so, he said, uncertain. Is that how you do it? No, I said. I mean, I never did. I don't understand. I brought up the English word transmigration on my translatomat. The Hennebit translation was about birds who fly north in the rainy season and south in the dry season. I brought up reincarnation, and it told me about digestive processes. I brought up my big gun, metempsychosis. The machine told me that there was no word for this belief held by many peoples in other planes that souls moved at death into different bodies. The translatomat was working in Hennebit, of course, but the words I have put in quotation marks were all in English. Anup came by while I was engaged in this research. The Hennebit used no large machinery, doing all their digging and building with hand tools, but they long ago borrowed electronic techniques from people on other planes, using them for information storage and communication and voting and so on. Anup adored the translatomat, which to him was a toy, a game. He laughed now. Belief? That's thinking so? He asked. I nodded. What's souls? He asked. Hello, Emmeline. I began with the body. It's always so much easier, you can make gestures. This here, me, arms, legs, head, stomach, body. In your language, I think it's Ado? He turned to nod. And your soul is in your body. Such as tripe? I tried a different tack. If someone is dead, we say their soul is gone. Gone? He echoed. Where? The body, the Ado, stays here. The soul goes away. Some say to an afterlife. He stared, mystified. We spent nearly an hour on the soul-body question, trying to find some common ground in both languages, and getting only more confused. The boy was unable to make any distinction at all between matter and spirit. Ado was all one was. One was all Ado. How could one be anything else? There was no room for anything else. How can there be anything more than Unua? He finally asked me. So, each of you, each person, is the universe? I asked. After checking that Unua did mean universe, all, everything, all time, eternity, entirety, the whole, and finding that it also meant all the courses of a dinner, the contents of a full jug or bottle, and an infant in any species at the moment of birth. How could we not be? Except for slippage, of course. At this point, I had to go help his mother make dinner, and was glad to. Metaphysics was never my strong point. It was interesting that these people, who as far as I knew had no organized religion, had a metaphysics which was completely clear to a boy of 15. I wondered how and when he had learned it. Presumably at school. When I asked him where he had learned about Ado being Unua and so on, he disclaimed all knowledge. I know nothing, he said. What Abba can I have? Please talk to people who know who they are, like Mrs. Tatava. So I did. I plunged in. She was doing flowers in chain stitch in yellow silk by the window overlooking the canal, where she had the afternoon light. I sat down nearby and said after a while, "Mrs. Tatava, do you remember lives you lived before?" "How could a person live more than one life?" she inquired. "Well, why do you have 18 votes?" She smiled. She had an extraordinarily sweet, placid smile. "Oh, well, you know, there are all the other persons who are living this life. They're here too. Everybody gets to vote, don't they? If they want to. I'm awfully lazy. I don't like to bother with all that information, so mostly I don't vote. Do you?" "I'm not I said, and stopped and brought up the word citizen on my translatomat. It said that the Hennebet word for citizen was person. "I'm not sure who I am," I said cautiously. "Many people never are," she said, quite earnestly now, looking up from her chain stitch. Her eyes amidst the wrinkles and behind their bifocals were brownish green. The Hennebit seldom looked directly at anyone, but she gazed at me. The gaze was kind, serene, remote, and brief. I felt that she did not see me very clearly. "But it doesn't matter, you know," she said. "For if one moment of your whole life you know that you are, then that's your life, that moment, that unua, that's all." In a short life I saw my mother's face like the sun, so I'm here. In a long life I went there and there and there, but I dug in the garden. The root of a weed came up in my hand, so I'm Unua. When you get old, you know, you keep being here instead of there. Everything is here. Everything is here, she repeated, with a comfortable little laugh, and went on with her embroidery. I've talked to other people about the Hennebit. Some of them are convinced that the Hennebit do literally experience reincarnation, remembering more and more of their previous lives as they grow older, until at death they rejoin an innumerable multitude of former selves, and are then reborn, bringing this immaterial trail or train of old lives into a new life. But I can't square this with the fact that soul and body are a single thing to them, so that either nothing or everything is material or immaterial. Nor does it fit what Mrs. Tatava said about all the other persons living this life. She did not say other lives. She did not say living this life at other times. She said, they're here too. I have no idea what Abba is, aside from the plant with pungent little berries. All I can really say about the Hennebit is that a few months with them confused my expectations of identity and my ideas about time very much, and that since my visit to them, I seem unable to maintain a really strong opinion about anything. But that is neither here nor there. Hey Luke man, just kind of finishing up the stream. Tried something a little different tonight that I haven't done on stream before. I was reading some short stories, some strange sci-fi short stories with a little synth ambience to go along with it. I think I'm about finished for tonight though.
Changing planes, changing planes. Changing planes, changing planes with us unlimited. The wisdom of the wisdom of the wisdom of the changing planes, changing planes, changing planes, safe in space.
Hey, thanks a lot for the gift sub.
Changing planes, changing planes, changing planes, changing planes. change and play, 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 change and play.
Thanks for coming by, everybody. Thanks if you hung out and listened to some reading, or if you just came later. I had fun with that. I think I'll do that again sometime. Bit of a different thing, but it's enjoyable to me anyway. Morgan Grace TV, you sneaky lurker person. Thanks, Emily. Have fun with Darius. I know you will. I'll hang out for a little bit too before I get to bed. Hope to see you guys again soon.